Let's get going on this. So I'm going to do the thing again and see how my sound is turning out, or if I'm still streaming at all. And that means I'm on my phone checking. Let's get going on this. So I'm going to do the thing. All right. See how my sound is turning. Okay, so my sound is okay. I do see that I probably need to change the title of this afterward, but that's easy. I can do that afterward. Hello there. Welcome to another of our lecture series for Kent State University's Games for Education course. Now, I got some feedback on sound quality last time, so I have my trusty Blue Snowball mic, and I'm going to have it closer to me this time, so hopefully you don't really have as hopefully it's a little bit better. I've been over this with folks several times. I'm not a streamer, so I'm not, like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to invest in a lot of audio equipment. So I'm just going to go with my fancy mic, which professional podcasters have told me is excellent. So yeah, thank you for watching this video. What are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about, this is the point in our semester where we stop really talking about some of the design stuff. There's still a few things to cover, but, really there's a lot of the stuff that really goes into designing these types of games. You kind of have to also experience it yourself. So there's not a lot of extra material. I mean, insofar as like an undergraduate course can cover for people that are starting out in this. It would be a topic worth revisiting once somebody's made a few games, and then you can go into a grad school environment and maybe talk about some more of the nuances and other elements of it. But most of the discussions for the rest of the semester, and let me even bring up for myself the let me bring up my list of lectures to see kind of what we're dealing with for the rest of the video series. Okay, so the next 4 lectures, which are the last lectures, because it goes up to 13, are going to cover. So this is going to cover really like the kind of research. It's going to be a little bit of an overview of the academic side of transformational game development, which, for some of you listening may not be very interesting, but I just kind of want to give folks an idea of what this part of the industry looks like in case it's an area where you're interested in getting into. Another one, the next week's one, is going to be a lecture on alternate impact. So alternate ways that you can have an impactful career in the game industry. Not just like, I want to make a great game type stuff, which we all do, but also things like, how do you help other people make great games, and how do you help other people find a place to showcase or a community to join, or things like that. Also, how do you find communities to join? So that's what next week is about. And then the last 2 weeks are lectures that I give in a lot of my game design classes, not just this one. One is on the concept of game juice or game feel. Again, this is kind of a standard one for me, but the reason that I do it is because I think that it's really important. I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to see this. And then the other one is visibility, booth, and promotion. Basically, like, what happens to your game once you've made it. It's a lecture I call "You Made a Game, Now What?" And again, I give this in most of my game design classes, but the reason I give it in most of my game design classes is that, students who are watching this, if you take my game prototyping class, you're going to be like, well, that's just repeat material. The reason it's repeat material, one, it's at the end of the semester when you don't want to have to study a bunch of new material anyway because you have projects. Two, it's stuff that's really important for everybody to know. So, if it didn't sink in the first time, I try to make sure it's sunk in the next time. So, that being said, let's get to this because I got to get through this pretty quick. This morning, I have to do this, and then I have to go drive down to give the live version of this class. So, topics for today. Who does transformational game research? How are these games released? And then how does this stuff reach the masses? Now, one of the questions that I've gotten several times from students in classes like this is, how can I put this game on my resume? And that's a very good question, because this is most of these games. Now, in the courses I have it structured here at Kent State, you can put these games on Steam. These are things that you could put on Steam, and that would make sense because you're not making them for a client. But I've had situations where students are making games for clients, and the game goes to the client, and thus mission accomplished. But they're like, well, how do I talk about that? And so that's what this lecture is about. This is about where does this stuff go, so that if you do find yourself in a situation where this becomes a chunk of your career, you'll know how to talk about it, and you'll know how to prove evidence that you've created work, even if that work is not like on the Switch eShop or some more standard place for games to be released. So first of all, who does transformational game research? That's the big question. It's like, what does a professional in this area look like's the wrong term, but you know what I mean? Like, what does a job path, I guess, look like? So first of all, the people that do this might be organizations. So not even just, individuals. Like, the first thing you have are organizations that utilize games to fulfill some other kind of mission. So it's not necessarily that these organizations are game studios. They are often not game studios, but they are organizations of some type that choose to utilize the gaming medium to express some, educate people on the thing that their organization is about. So things might be like nonprofit organizations, lobbying groups, advocacy organizations. So here I have a picture of two games that I made for such groups. One is Life Quest, which is the game that combats recidivism. This was done for a research group within George Mason University about 9 years ago at the time of this recording. And the idea there was that it was a game meant to encapsulate research on how to help people through their parole processes. The bottom one was for a initiative called Ask, Listen, Learn, which was a lobbying group from the spirits industry, so alcohol industry, and they were trying to combat underage drinking through educational games. So that's what those are the shape of like games in this area. Usually what they do is they would collect what's called seed money or grant money. So basically, money awarded by other organizations to fund projects. Or they might put up the seed or grant money themselves and then take pitches from game development studios. And those game development studios can submit to the call for proposals and then win the money based on their proposal and then get the contract, i.e. the grant money, to fulfill the project. So these games are not made in-house by the organizations that are behind them. They're usually outsourced to a game studio. So this is an area of opportunity for you where you could make a game studio that does this kind of work. And there are ones in the area, even in our area in Northeast Ohio, like Snowbright Studio, exceptional studio. I'll have to tell Grace that I gave their studio a little plug, but very deservedly so. Really wonderful people and awesome studio with tons of experience in this area, including working at with the Department of Education, the Smithsonian, and all kinds of wonderful things. But that's the kind of studio that would do this kind of work. So that's organizations. Next are individual developers. There's not a lot to know here, except that people making games solo in this area are typically making short, simple, autobiographical, or highly personal games. So this is also where you see small, message-heavy games, so-called art games. Games like this are typically very tiny, made quickly, and often very expressive of a person's personal experiences. Now, when I say made quickly, that can fluctuate. I've known people that are like, oh, well, I make micro games and I make them in 48 hours or no longer than 6 days, and they function like they're made in 6 days. And that's the kind of thing where it's you have to be careful, because if the game is janky, it's going to take away from people being able to. Basically, it's gonna wear away people's patience with it, and then you might not, have somebody get to the message. So when you see these games, usually they are, if they're done really, really quickly, they're done really, really quickly by maybe somebody who has a lot of experience, delivering on these kind of things in a polished way, or you have somebody. When I say quick, I mean 3 to 6 months, which can still be very quick for game development. To give you a sense of, some of the games that we've looked at from my library, Laziski's Revenge took about 3 months. And that was I wanted to do it in 1 month. It was 3, and then I had to cut features anyway. So, it still looks like game development. But, so this is, but they're small and they're made relatively quickly. Because, otherwise if you make a commercial game, you're looking 2, 3, 4 year project. You see a lot of engines like Twine, Pico 8, GB Studio has become kind of at the time of this recording, a new force in this area because of the small accessibility, no code, simple art, things like that. Anything where you can make small games very quickly, small expressive games. So you usually see these games either released commercially, for a few bucks on Steam or itch.io, or free with donations through a Patreon, or again, itch. Game Jolt is also excellent, women-owned game marketplace site. So, those kind of sites are where these games live. Now, lest you think but that's not big enough for me. This image is from a game called Sibel by Nina Freeman, who's gone on to become work at a ton of places. I mean, Nina Freeman's had an amazing career, right? But it was an expressive game about having a relationship on the internet that was greatly awarded at places like the IGF. So if you think that these little games don't matter, now Sibel's not a little game. It's actually a pretty big production comparatively to some of the ones that I've seen in the past. But if you think these sort of expressive art games don't matter and just get me to the big Unreal made immersive sims and stuff like that, these things are winning IGF. So the medium 3D, 2D, the engine does not dictate quality. Having something to say with your game can, even if it's a simple game, can be, again, think Depression Quest, another really critically lauded and successful game. Think about stuff like that. You don't have to work in a AAA environment to have impact in the industry. So there are actually, and I alluded to this before, there are game studios that do transformational games. And sometimes these have similar goals to individuals. So, like, sometimes you have a studio that makes art games. Though their games tend to be far less personal when you have a whole studio doing it, because, if you're going to have that personal message, you really need the entire team to be behind it. And sometimes that's a little harder to do. That being said, that's not to say that games like this can't be super personal, but it becomes a team management and kind of getting everybody on board, getting all the stakeholders on board challenge, as opposed to like you making it to express your own your own experiences. I should mention too, we actually have graduates of the program that do that kind of work too. So, like, look them up. The one of them is Studio. I know this is kind of. I know every time I have to like Google something on my phone during one of these, it kind of ruins the flow. But just give me Studio 74E. Which is one of our graduates, and she works on really amazing stuff. So go check those out, and uses GB Studio. So yeah, they're. But that's an example of a person who founded their own studio and is doing expressive art games from our program. So games by studios are, as one would expect, apt to have higher production values than games by a single person. Some studios make games with a mission independently. This is often done by studios that specialize in educational games. But now, when I say independently, I mean like literally, without the backing of a big publisher, things like that. Lots of studios, even commercial indie studios, develop serious games on contract for clients as a stable source of income. So my publisher for my Game Boy game Kudzu, which is back there, there's the poster for it. They have a separate website for government contracts. And I know other people who've run their indie studios with, especially like government contracts. So that's a steady source of income that allows people to build their kind of commercial indie games or their expressive games. So that's a good way to have your cake and eat it too a little bit. You're doing the regular kind of keep the lights on job by day, and then by night and other times you're working on sort of the dream project. Now, so then there are academic labs, which is a blend of these models. So those found at various universities around the world. I actually should update this graphic because the American University Game Lab is now called the Game Center. But these organizations are typically created via external funding. So again, some client or other group will give a university money to start a lab or a center or whatever you want to call it. And this pays for researchers and faculty members to be hired, who then establish partnerships with external organizations. And those partnerships include the development of often transformational games. So you see that the TAG Center at Concordia University, the Magic Center at RIT, and like I said, American University Game Center. So basically faculty and other researchers are brought on. That usually also pays for some. This is usually a graduate type thing, so there will be classes created usually for graduate students, and those graduate students will have maybe some funded positions. And then what happens is that these people will come together and then again usually develop transformational games as a more traditional game studio, while also having research positions at the university. So the people in this group also typically publish papers based on the games that they create. So I do this in my own career, even when I'm not explicitly making a serious game. I will usually create a game and then publish papers on the game, whether it be the development of the game, the testing of the game, the funding of the game, or some other research into efficacy thing like that. And then that really lets me sit down with the game, understand how the critical language behind its making that then feeds the content in my classes. So that's how that relationship in an academic world works. So now that we're just gonna break the fourth wall here. Because it's the fourth wall. So this is where I tell you about this is where you learn all the things about what we do. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because this tells you part of this area of the industry. This is an area of the industry that not a lot of students may think they can get a job in, or they go into school expecting to, I'm going to be a professor. But this is an area that I'm in the game industry. I'm in the game industry. I've been going to GDC for over a decade, and I've spoken there, and people who are at AAA studios listen to things I have to say about things like level design and instructional design and stuff like that. It's like, just because somebody does not work in those big studios does not mean that you're not in the industry. This is a thing that a lot of students, I guess, need the reassurance of, and I like to make sure I do that because, there's lots of ways to get into the industry. I like to say that the industry is one in which there is a well-locked front door, but all the windows are open. So I always tell students, look, it's great if you can get in the front door, but look for those windows. And then sometimes the window leads you to the same place that the front door would have taken you. So think about that. And again, sometimes you may think that you want a certain type of job when you're 22. But then, you work for a little bit, and then you meet somebody and you get married, and maybe you grow your family, and then suddenly crunching and working tons of AAA studio hours doesn't seem so great. Even if you've been making games the whole time and now you're starting to get emails from recruiters for AAA studios, you kind of say, oh no, thanks. I want to do this now instead. This is kind of how careers go, and that's okay. That is okay. Don't wait for permission from other people, from studios, to make your games. Just make your games, and the other stuff will work itself out. Which brings us again to academic faculty like us. So there are several different types of job titles that you see within this space, each with different sets of duties and priorities. Teachers typically have at least a master's degree, but it can vary by field. So I have a master's degree in architecture. My academic unit considers a master's degree like that, which included over 60 credits of instruction. So equivalent to what would be a Master of Fine Arts, an MFA. So that kind of master's degree is usually considered terminal. Things, so not all master's degree are created equal, basically. They're all very good, but for positions like this, you usually need a terminal degree, which means a master's degree of the kind of MFA level that's over 60 or so credits. So first, faculty are responsible for three things. They're responsible for teaching, which is what they do in the classroom, and helping students outside of class. Next is research, where a faculty member is creating works within their field, finding funding if your department cares about that. Some don't. like arts positions often don't require you to get grants. Or publishing things like papers, articles, and books that add to the field's knowledge. So that's what we do when we write, is we're adding to the knowledge base of the field. Lastly is service, which is serving on academic committees and other things that do with governance of the university community. So, things like being on faculty council, like I'm on our faculty council, and we deal with things like travel requests and stuff like that. So that's what academic faculty are responsible for. Now, second, the amount of each thing that you have to do varies by what type of faculty you are. So sometimes you'll hear. So this is, in our program, you may not understand the difference between the faculty members and our individual jobs. So this is kind of what explains that. I can feel my students' eyes glaze over, but this is very pertinent to transformational games. I will let you know how in a second. So when you have what's called an adjunct faculty member, they're typically responsible for only teaching and really only for a few classes. These are essentially contractors brought in from in the community or the industry that know an area well enough that they can be allowed to teach in the area, and but they usually hold other jobs. This is, one does not often make enough income as a adjunct faculty, which is a bad situation that I hate. I don't like that adjunct faculty are so severely underpaid, and we've tried to tell people that they should be paid more. We'll see if that ever happens someday. We can keep banging that drum. A non-tenure track faculty is a full-time employee of the university, but mainly they are responsible for teaching and sometimes can do service, but it's not in everybody's contract. So it is a full-time person responsible for teaching. Some do research on their own, and some universities actually reward this for, if you're non-tenure track, but you do research. Kent's pretty good about NTT research. They weigh it heavily in their promotion guidelines for folks and like professional development stuff, which I like a lot. I've been to places where, like, when I was a non-tenure track, I was treated like some kind of second-class citizen. That's not how it is here, and I like that a lot. Tenure track faculty, which is what I am, are also full-time employees that do all three. So I do all three with a heavy emphasis on building a body of research work. Tenure track professors must submit to yearly tenure reviews through a period of about 5 or 6 years. At the time of this recording, I put in my case to be tenured. I don't know if I'm jinxing that by putting that on a video, but to give you a sense of you have to put in files every year. And then after that, we are, if we get tenure, it's like a permanent position at the university. These are usually faculty engaging. These are usually the faculty that you see engaging in the transformational games ecosystem. So, and again, like I said, I promised I'd bring this explanation back to this. This is where transformational games really become a useful area of game development and useful for, basically there is a system that allows for and accommodates and encourages transformational games to be made. So, what I like about this type of position, and I don't make a ton of explicitly transformational games. I make games that are commercial, but then have a transformational twist, I guess you could call them. But I'm not making transformational games in the way that I was 5 years ago, where it was really mission based. But what's nice is that this type of position allows somebody like me to work in this area without having to depend solely on that as a source of income, and thus have to really work in within commercial constraints as much. I make commercial games, and I've made games that are successful and have done well, in commercial areas, but they still often like the serious games, the transformational aspect of them affords like an extra novelty, an extra little punch. So like Little Nemo is very commercial focused, right? But because it's related to academic research, both into the original work that it's based on, Little Nemo and Slumberland by Winsor McCay in 1905, and a member of like an important person in the history of animation, but also because it's research into a way of developing games in such a way that art becomes a research instrument, which is a thing that like most people don't think of game art as, right? So that's kind of like, those are the research aspects of that work. It's gained a set of like, it's gained a novelty that it wouldn't have otherwise if I was just like kind of using the Little Nemo name or something like that. Because then it's like really just cashing in on people's like nostalgia of an NES game whose IP happens to be public domain. So that's kind of like that's kind of like how you work this sort of thing, is that you can make these games and they give you this sort of novelty benefit, and I think that can be really helpful. And then finally, you have what are called in-residence positions. They are 1 or 2 year limited full-time contracts where a professional from the field performs their industry duties, but then maybe picks up some classes at the university. So this would be like something if we invited a person who had their own commercial practice and said, could you be our artist in residence? And then they would come and do their commercial practice at the university, move here for like a year to 18 months, and then just like kind of be there to again, pick up some classes, but then really just kind of be like a model for students to engage with and interact with. And sometimes they do their normal work and sometimes they pick up new work. And they use this as a period of like a sort of career sabbatical to like do something they've always wanted to do, like a little indie game or something like that. But that is, I've actually been an artist in residence before. So that would be like, that's sort of a mix of things, where it's kind of researchy, but, like very short. So how are these games released? What happens to them? First of all, is actually commercially. I've alluded to this with like Little Nemo and La Mancha. Many games with transformational themes can be released. There's nothing about making a transformational game that necessarily means that it has to be only academic. It can be both. It can again, have your cake and eat it too. So a transformational game that was released through typical retail markets includes like Wingspan by Elizabeth Hargrave. You'll occasionally see games like this on Steam and other markets as well. So it's not only non-digital, it can be digital too. By this point, we've discussed at pretty considerable length the benefits of releasing commercially. Your game is not only subject to the needs of transformational research, but you also have to make something crafted well, and that appeals to consumers. So, having a transformational game but making it a commercial style game can be really beneficial for the work, and it makes your work better because you have to answer to gamers. So that's something to consider. Now, this doesn't fit every game. Some organizations want their games to be made not for commercial purposes, like the underage drinking games I made about 10 years ago. Well, I didn't. My students made them. I was the teacher. You know what I mean? But, often organizations will want their games to be played in other contexts, such as part of workshops or in-school sessions or something like that, by the subject of the research studies or within classrooms. So, these were games made for middle and high schoolers to learn about the dangers of underage drinking and learn good behaviors to take on instead of underage drinking. So that's a, you're not going to release this widely, and that's okay, because it's not for that. So again, this gets to that question of like, well, how do I put it on my resume? It's launched if it's delivered to the client. That's it. If you have a client and they want a game, but they're not necessarily going to release it on Steam or a marketplace or like an app store, but they have received it and are using it in their pilot study or their workshops or whatever, that's it. That's it. You're done. You did it. So game launched. So consider that when you do this. So now in these types of situations, games do tend to be like released really quickly. So this is why, again, this gets into one of the reasons that these games have a poor reputation is because they're often made quickly and they're often made on smaller budgets than a full commercial game. We're talking like tens of thousands of dollars instead of hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. So that's kind of where the quickness and the budget lend to what people perceive as poor quality. Now, this case can be confusing for new designers because they don't mark a traditional release of the kind sought out in resumes. I've already said this. This is the slide where I say that if the client has taken it, then it's released. So, moving on. So what about that publishing thing? If not commercially, how is this... so if you're not doing these things commercially, how is this research distributed? Because again, so if I go to like Little Nemo, that's going to be released commercially. Now, it does have research components that somebody downloading it on the Nintendo eShop is not even going to care about. Maybe they do. That's cool. We actually do have some fans in our community that are really... They're like, you wrote an academic paper about it. Can I read it? Which is like, I love. It's so good. Our community rocks. But like, that's the kind of thing that you want to, you need to know like where this goes and how that fits in your ecosystem. Most people aren't going to care about this, but, where does that go and how is it used? Because again, if you're not working in a commercial context, then there's this to think about. And what is it and where does it go? So one of the main places that transformational games work is published is in journals. So beyond the game itself, let's say you do make a game for an organization like, the assessment games, Function Force that we made with ETS years ago. That's for in schools. So what we also did was create we created journal articles and conference articles for it. So journals, first of all, if you don't know, are peer-reviewed, meaning that people like me receive these. We sign up to be reviewers, and we receive the papers, and the papers are anonymized, so I don't know whose paper I'm reading, and I read the paper, and I go, I'm reading it on my phone for some reason, pantomiming it. And then I say, yes, include. Hooray. Or it's like, no, I have concerns and let me type out my concerns. So that's a peer review. I am a peer of this person and I will review it. Which means that a board of experts in this field reviews and selects submitted articles. This review gives these a lot of prestige if you make it through your peers. Other smart and opinionated people about games who are interested in this kind of research. If you can make it through them, that's a big deal. That means your work is good. And again, this is where you get into the research part of the early part of the class. This is why I ask for peer-reviewed stuff, because it's vetted. It's not just like something some crank puts on Twitter or their blog, especially now because Twitter is even more cranky. So, for transformational games, the research is published in either one of a growing number of game design or game studies journals, or in a journal from a field for which the game was made. So an example might be if you make a medical game and it has certain like quantifiable results. You can publish those results in a medicine journal, right? And that's where something like that might go. So sometimes it's published in game places, game venues. Sometimes it's published in the venue of the field being served by the game. And let's quickly talk about game research subjects and terms for games. Now, I've mentioned that game studies, I mentioned game studies a few times, but what is it? Game studies is the field of academic inquiry around games, the act of playing them, and the cultures that surround them. It's not games journalism. We are not ranking the Mega Man games or something. Or what you see, or, telling people that is Metroid Dread on Xbox, or what you might see on sites like IGN or Kotaku. It's not previews, it's not reviews.